writing assignment is to go over our planning sheet that we used to talk about the way that Brian has changed throughout the novel, and to basically turn that into a written response, kind of like a mini essay. If that's scary sounding, then think of it more as a long written answer. Instead of a short written answer, it's going to be a long written answer, okay? So I'm just going to go through the PowerPoint of instructions with you to make sure that we have a pretty good understanding of what it is that we're up to, okay? So here we go. Oh, oopsie. I'll make myself little so I can just stare at you from over here. Okay, so this is what we are doing as a quick review for you, okay? So your final writing assignment, remember, is a short to long written response that explains how Brian's character has changed throughout the novel. And there are 3 ways that we can talk about how he's changed. So we can do a little mention about physical changes, which was one of kind of the freebies I gave you on the sheet. But then a couple people like Tamar had a great something to add about another physical change, okay? The next is, oh, I'm so sorry. Ooh, let me just change that real quick because it says emotional or physical changes, but it should say emotional or mental changes. So embarrassing. So the next one is emotional or mental changes. How does he change in his mind, or how does his emotions towards being stuck at the lake change? And the final one is new skills that Brian learns. Okay? What kind of new skills does he learn throughout the novel that he didn't have in the beginning, which would change like his skill set and the stuff that he can do? So this is what our assignment is about. Next, I'm just going to remind you a little bit about quotations, because we had our last Zoom meeting where we were pulling quotations from the text that were going to act as evidence to show each of these changes, right? We cannot just say Brian becomes mentally stronger than he was in the beginning. We need to have proof. We need to have words from the text that show that this has happened. Otherwise, it's just your opinion, and that's not a very good, strong answer, okay? So just a couple of things to remember about using quotations. Always, where can I put this? I'll put this right here. Always use quotation marks to show what words are directly from the book, okay? You need to pull words directly from the book. Next, always include the chapter that quotation has come from in brackets after the quotation. So normally you would do page numbers. Because of how I've broken up the text for us, we're just going to use what chapter it's from, okay? And next, try to keep your quotation short and only include the really important information, okay? This is a big one. Try not to have a quotation that's a whole paragraph if really there's only one sentence in the middle that you really want to use, okay? Next, here is a really handy guide on how to structure each paragraph. Because really, if I was writing this essay, I would probably put each of the different types of changes into a different paragraph. So I would have maybe one short paragraph that would talk about the physical changes he's undergone, and then I would have one short paragraph or longer that would talk about how he has changed mentally, how his emotions and his mind has changed, and then I'd have another paragraph explaining how his skill set has changed. Okay, so how his abilities to do things have really changed throughout the novel. So while you're writing those paragraphs, here, I'm going to move over here. This is a really great guide to remember. And it's fun because it's called P. So I've written down here, don't forget to P when you're structuring your paragraphs, okay? And what P stands for is this big chart over here. And I know it looks a little scary, so I'm going to talk you through it. So the first thing that you want to do at the beginning of your paragraph is state your point. What is the main idea of this paragraph? And this is exactly like a topic sentence, right? So here on this side, this whole column gives you some possible sentence starters for each one. So something like, the first change in Brian's character is. Right? When you get into talking about changes, you could say something like that. Or another important change Brian experienced is this. And you could divide your paragraph in this way. Okay? Another really important first kind of point is that you'll want to say something like, Brian has experienced many changes throughout the novel. One good example of this is do, and that could become your first paragraph, okay? Next, so first you'll have your main point, which will be your topic sentence in your paragraph, and then you're going to go into your evidence. And I know some people have struggled with this idea of evidence. What evidence is a quotation from the book that proves your point. So if you're going to say something like, at the beginning of the book, Brian was a little bit heavier and was all bashed up and bitten by mosquitoes, then you would want to find a quotation from the book that talks about this. So maybe that point in the beginning of the book when he can just barely open his eyes because he's so bug bitten by mosquitoes and stuff, okay? You need to have that quotation. So again, over here, these are some nice ways to sort of work that quotation in. So in the beginning of the book, it says Brian is all bitten by mosquitoes. This is shown when Paulson writes blah, 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 blah. Okay? We know this because Paulson says do. And remember, Gary Paulson is the man that wrote the book, right? Okay. The other thing to remember, let's actually finish this up. So the very last thing is an explanation. After you use a quotation in your writing, you need to explain what that quotation is saying. So it might seem a bit weird because you kind of make your big point and then you show evidence from the book that proves it and then you explain it. You might feel a bit like you're repeating yourself, but it's very similar to when you have in a paragraph a topic sentence and then your star ideas and then your concluding sentence. Right? It's how you remind the reader what that paragraph was about and what your main point was. So your explanation will explain why that quotation is important. What does that quotation prove? And you'll sort of remind the reader. So again, some possible sentence starters are things like, this quotation explains, this is evidence that, here we see that, and those are all really nice follow-up sentences to explain what your quotation is really proving from the book. Okay? One other thing I want to mention is that really, if you're going to be writing a really good essay, you're going to have to show what Brian was like in the beginning and what Brian was like in the end, right? So the strongest possible essay would not only have point, evidence, and explanation about one quotation showing change, but it would have it about two, right? We would say, at the beginning of the story, Brian really struggles to make fire. This is shown when, and then we'd have the little quotation about how he's really struggling to make fire, and we would explain that. And then we would say, at the end of the novel, however, making fire is really easy for Brian. And then we'd have the quotation showing that it's really easy, and we would explain that. And that would be one really strong point about how his skills have changed. Okay? Okay, let's keep going. So, next up, we have a general sort of guideline just to give you an idea about what you're kind of looking to put into your essay, depending on what kind of grade you would like. So if you discuss only one or two changes, you're in sort of the RA range. You have been able to discuss them. Depending on how well you discuss them, your grade could go down a little bit. But if you only talk about maybe one new skill that Brian has learned and one way that his emotions have changed, you're kind of in the RA range, right? We've got 2 little bits. If you go ahead and talk about maybe 3 or 4 changes, so maybe you talk briefly about how his physical appearance has changed, you mention 2 new skills that he's learned, and you talk a little bit about how his emotions about being stuck at the lake have changed, we're kind of in the CA range, okay? If you discuss 5 or more changes, we're getting closer to an E. We're getting a little bit closer to an E. So maybe you want to talk about like physical changes, 2 different skills that Brian's become really much better at, and 2 emotional or mental changes that he's gone through. I just wanted to give this to you as a guideline because one other thing to remember is this is a writing assignment. So the other thing that will affect your mark is your punctuation proper, right? Is your spelling correct? Have you organized your thoughts into proper paragraphs? All of those kinds of things will also affect your mark, but this is kind of a general guideline so that you know how much information you want to include depending on which mark you'd really like to shoot for, okay? The very last thing I'm going to show you is the rubric, just so you have an idea. And I know, again, there's a lot of writing on here. I will also attach the rubric to the message for today. But just to go over it, I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of what's happening. So content would be, have you chosen information that really is discussing how Brian has changed? Are you talking about other parts of the book, or are you mostly talking about changes that Brian has undergone? Okay, so that's content. The next piece is it sort of using the right tone? Are you using really casual language? Are you saying things like I, me, my opinion, which you don't want to be doing? Are you keeping it professional like an essay? Next would be content management, and this one is, have you organized your thoughts into paragraphs, and have you used quotations? Okay? Do you have those 2 things? And are your quotations used properly? Do you have quotation marks? Have you inserted your chapter into brackets? Things like that. The next one we work with all the time, which is sentence structure. So are you writing proper sentences? Are they organized in the proper fashion? Do they make sense as a sentence? Are you mixing up your beginnings, or does every sentence start with, in Hatchet, Gary Paulson says, in Hatchet, Brian changes this way, in Hatchet, right? Or are you mixing it up a little bit? Next is vocabulary. So are you using words that really, really make your point well? Are you using some higher level words, or are you using all kind of basic words? Are you using words that really help to explain your point, and are you using them properly? And the final one down here is conventions, which is things like spelling mistakes, punctuation errors, that kind of thing. Okay? Do you have the right tense and stuff like that? So this is the rubric. Again, I will attach it to the post for today. At 1 p.m., we're going to have an optional Zoom meeting in case you have any questions about any of this PowerPoint or you're feeling a bit confused. Sorry, I didn't mean to say 1 p.m. That's your math Zoom with Mr. Callan if you choose to go. But ours will be at 2 p.m. I've also attached to the ELA page for today the recording of the meeting that we had where we all brainstormed quotations that would show some of the changes that Brian has undergone. So if you'd like to have a little peek at that and rewatch some chunks, it's there for you. It's available for you to do that, okay? Okay, so I'll see you if you need any help or have any questions at 2 p.m. And I want to let you know that the rough draft of your short answer mini essay is due tomorrow. And then I'm going to look over it and do any little comments and adjusting. So please begin working on it today. If you still are digging around for quotations, get in there and find some, because you cannot write a strong response, just like every single reading assessment that we've done. You can't have a strong one unless you have quotations directly from the text, okay? Okay, so I'll see you at 2 if you have any questions, and I wish you the best of luck. Bye, everybody.